Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our demonstration. I see the folks are coming in now and our numbers are going up, so we'll be deliberate and slow as we get started. We want to make sure everybody's audio is working and comfortable. Hope wherever you are, you're having a good day. It's a nice 75 degrees and sunny up here in Massachusetts, so we're having a good day. All right. So folks, I'm just going to get started, and I want to welcome you all and thank you all for coming and spending an hour or so with us today. Today we're going to be talking with, I think it's number 5 in our year-long series with Adam Smith and Heather Liu. Today we're talking about college-ready students. Let's try student-ready colleges. And we have a panel of professionals in this area that we're going to have a nice conversation with today. Before I hand off the presentation to Adam and Heather, just a few bits of housekeeping. We are going to follow up with you in, what is today, Thursday, probably Monday or Tuesday of next week, with a follow-up email that will include this recording and Heather's accompanying blog. And also the way to communicate with Heather and Adam and the panel is if you look in your GoToWebinar module, there should be a little question mark or the word questions. Go ahead and click in that right now and just type in where you're calling from and just prove to us. And so also I can show Adam and Heather and make sure they see where the questions are coming in. So go ahead and click that question mark and just type in, you know, Massachusetts or Texas or Washington State, or the name of your school, name of your city, whatever you want. Just go ahead and type that in now. And once we are set with that, we will get going. I see the question from Ashley. We do not have live closed captioning. I'll actually type this as well, Ashley, just in case. And we will caption the recording and get that out to you. Folks are entering where they're calling from right now. We have Kansas and Michigan, Pennsylvania, Penn State, Alberta, welcome Canada, Iowa, Kentucky, Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina. We have some really nice representation here. I will be keeping my eye on the chat for any technical questions, Heather and Adam, so don't worry about that. I'll try to take care of those. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over the mic and the cameras to you guys. And thanks again so much for participating today.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you, team. So happy to see you all on this lovely Thursday. You know, it's a time and place. We are here in community, which is phenomenal. I know that for many folks, the academic term is either just finishing up or you've just made it to that point in your academic term. So congratulations, and we're so happy to just be here in this moment. My name is Heather. I also go by HC, and I use she, her, and hers pronouns. I'm going to throw it over to Adam.
Thank you all for being here. So excited to have this conversation today. As always, thanks to Infobase, our great panelists. It's just an honor to have these conversations lifted up by Infobase as a thought leader piece for the community, for the culture, for people, to have conversations about things that we're always talking about in those private spaces, in those private places, but a chance to talk today about the old adage that people would always grind about: we need students to be college ready. We need students to be college ready. Well, today we're going to talk about colleges, not just our institutions, but us being student ready, and what that really looks like, in particular based on the students we have now, which are very, very different from the students 3-4 years ago. We all have learned really crazy, new, different things about students based on the fall freshman cohort at colleges and universities, and none of that's going to change. So we have some really great experts that are going to talk today with you and create a conversation around what does it look like to be student ready in this era, and how do we not only hold ourselves accountable to that, but how do we lead that within our institutions? So thank y'all for being here. Again, I'm Adam Smith. We'll introduce in a second, but thank y'all.
Yes, thanks, Adam. So once again, we're here for college-ready students. Let's try student-ready colleges. I like to just bring, Audre Lorde into this mix as well, knowing that many of these spaces and places were not spaces where we were meant to survive. And so how do we flip that narrative and also start centering the people who are, most impacted by the colonial nature of a lot of our institutions? And so I appreciate the space. And also just to kind of start that process, something that we've done in terms of our practice as we start these conversations is really acknowledging our time, space, and place that we're in currently. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And so I invite you just to kind of nestle into your seats, take some deep breaths, and join us in this moment. So many of us currently reside on the stolen lands of Indigenous peoples. Heather, that's myself, is located on Dakota and Ojibwe land in Minnesota. And then Adam is currently on the land of Shawnee and Osage peoples in Kentucky. Since we're remote, I invite you to type the land and space you occupy in the question box. We honor the physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual spaces that we occupy. These lands, often unceded, have been taken by force and colonized and have legacies of violence, murder, and pain. This land and its eco-memory long precedes us and will long outlive us in wisdom and energy. I want to invite us to recognize how this space, time, and place hold many truths and power and deserves to be reunited and restored with the Indigenous peoples of the lands we occupy. And land back is a much needed and necessary action as our praxis as healers and educators in community. Land back is not just a phrase, but we must act upon this through reparations, legislation, solidarity, and practice by redistributing power, wealth, and in action through meaningful relationship building and coalition led by the people most impacted at the center. We also honor our ancestors and the narratives of the peoples and their knowledge who have empowered us to be here in community today. We're in the midst of a global pandemic and continued racialized violence, legacies of colonialism, genocide in boarding schools, COVID-19, murders of Black folks at the white supremacist hands of policing, violence and assaults on trans women of color, Stop Line 3 and ecological violence, hate against Asian women, femmes, elders, and youth, immigration and detention centers, and continued xenophobia against the communities of color that we belong to. To process the legacy of trauma and in our lived experiences is immense, and we continue to live through the trauma of mass shootings of our Black, Brown, Indigenous, and mixed people of color in communities, which is overwhelming. Yet we are here in this moment together. Take a moment to breathe that in. Our histories are complicated, tangled, and filled with resilience of our ancestors from before and yet to come. Who are the ancestors you call upon to guide you in this moment? I invite you to write their names in the question box as well. We want to imagine spaces and places where we are liberated, transformed, and in solidarity, together in struggle, magic, hope, imagination, love, and futures. I recognize the immense power and privilege we all hold in sharing our time together today. And I wish you and our community health, safety, slivers of joy, and care in the midst of a time of grief, death, pain, and trauma. All right, so we're going to do some introductions and then get to the heart of our discussion. Adam, who are you?
Yeah, good to see y'all. Adam Smith, he, him, his. Good to be here with you. Product of the epicenter of change that is Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. I've been working in the community organizing, nonprofit, trio, higher ed, student success, transformational business, and career in ministry for quite a while, 25 years now. Just an honor to be here with you. My contact information is there. We'll let our panelists introduce themselves.
Bird. I'm Heather, she, her, hers. I'm a small, round, racially ambiguous Asian person. I currently have pink hair. That's different than before. So in case you didn't recognize me, it's still me. Have some big old black glasses on and wearing a black tee today. So that's just an introduction. I am not Chinese. I am currently here in Minnesota. I am from California and from the space of the Kizh peoples. I identify as an alchemist, activist, and advocate. And a lot of my work is around art and healing, as well as relational leadership. All right, now it's your turn, Shanice.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Shanice Smith, she, her, hers as well. I'm super excited to be here and thank you all for joining us, especially with this conversation. But a little bit about me and my facts. I am a proud doodle mom, always and forever. My baby boy name is Charlie Bear Brown Smith. If you all can see him, he's everything to his mama. So he's my pride and joy, everything for me. I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a friend. To my students, I feel like I'm all of that and above, helicopter parent and everything it includes. So it encompasses a lot with my job. I work at the University of Alabama within athletics. So that's kind of how what my why is and what I do. So I was a former student athlete myself at the University of Cincinnati over in track. And in my profession today, I help students persist and make sure that they get to graduation. So I was able to work with football, track, a lot of different sports. So it's been really, really good so far. And all my contact information is listed. Roll Tide.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jamal McDaniel. My pronouns are he, him, his. Um, in my professional life, I serve as the director for the University of Kentucky Martin Luther King Center for Diversity Education. In my personal life, I'm a husband, a father, a son, a brother, a friend, a mentor. I am what I'm starting to classify as a continued generation Black college graduate and a first generation PhD student. So hopefully the first generation PhD graduate. I am a person of faith and I live by the scripture Proverbs 16 verse 9. Proud member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Um, and really, I do this work because I want to see change and be a part of the change for our students, primarily for those from historically marginalized backgrounds, our Black students, our Latinx students, our Asian students, all the students, right, that we know are on campus who often feel left out, right, and need spaces and people who help them feel both affirmed and included. So happy to be here.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon. My name is Christine Faude Rose, and I am the Associate Director with the Office of Academic and Retention Support at the University of Akron. I am a wife, I am a mother, daughter, friend, mentor. I am originally from Bogota, Colombia, and I moved to Miami, Florida, was raised there, and then moved to Akron, Ohio about 10 years ago. First generation college student, social worker, turned into higher ed professional, mentor. But you still do social work while you're in higher ed all the time. So that's just what I do. My passion is working with Latinx students and coaching and mentoring my LGBTQ students. And I'm just here to be a voice for our students that so much need it right now, especially in this time. So thank you for being here and welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Evora Baker. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a daughter, a sister, aunt, cousin, friend, mother of many. I welcome you all today. Happy Pride Month to everybody. I am a TRIO SSS director. I am first gen and income eligible or low income undergrad. Um, Graduating from Macalester, University of Phoenix, American College of Education. I'm also a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the Eastern Panhandle Alumna Chapter. I'm an advocate, a provider, a protector of underrepresented, marginalized populations of college students who I know are destined to make a positive impact on our society. Welcome.
Aurora, that's great. Shout out to the TRIO crew. Anybody that's coming that is in a TRIO program, currently works for TRIO or has worked for TRIO, been a TRIO student, please shout out TRIO in the chat or in the question box. Put a 1 in, put in TRIO works, whatever you want to do. I wouldn't be in higher ed if it wasn't for TRIO programs. We know that TRIO has held up our nation and done more for our nation than anybody gives TRIO programs credit for. It did a huge amount for me. So, Avora, I'd like to kick off with you. So first off, family, please use the question box. I don't want to just talk. Y'all hear me enough. Okay. Shanice definitely hears me enough. So please put questions in the chat, or not in the chat, in the question box, because we want this to be a dialogue back and forth between us. Questions, comments, if we're full of it, please tell us that. Again, the topic is how we become student ready. So there's a lot of things that I think all of us in the business of student success and retention predicted around the freshman class that we saw last fall. We knew that there would be issues with mental and emotional health. We knew that there would be issues of muscle atrophy, of how to be a student again in an academic space. I think we also knew that there would be some grade inflation because high school grades, high school classes were not built to be online, and students were getting grades that often didn't equate to, right, what it meant in the past. And then you converge on top of it test optional, which was what the one level set was the test. Now you don't have it. So you had students thinking, oh, I'm an honors calc student getting A's, and the university thinking that, but they really were doing what's called mastery work. But many of us, especially in the trio spaces, we knew about grade inflation a long time ago, where we'd have our valedictorians from urban rural high schools getting 20 composites on the ACT, right? So Avora, in particular, for trio eligible, low income, first generation, and or disabled veterans in an SSS program, what did you see as the impact? And how has the last 3 years changed trio eligible students differently? Because you're on campus, so you get to see how it impacts the other students at the community college that are not in SSS. How have you seen it affect trio students differently? What have you seen those impacts, and how have those things been different than the non-trio students?
Okay, so the first thing that we can start talking about, Adam, are the college going rates. So I did a little research, of course, in preparation. And in fall of 2020, two-year public institutions were at like a 13.1% loss. So right away, we know that students who are typically low income, they look to the community colleges because it's a more affordable way of gathering education. So we also saw that students of color whose parents had less than a bachelor's degree were deterring their enrollment into college. So when we talk about the college going rates, we know that those went down, and it especially was impactful for first gen low income students. And there's not a whole lot of research yet, but I'm sure students with disabilities also felt the pain. When we look at our retention rates, right? So TRIO is driven by retention. Everything that we do is all about retention, graduation. And when we have our students coming into these colleges and they're not prepared, they're taking classes in an environment that they've never been familiar with, having that retention, persistence, it was near to impossible. Now, when we talk about other factors, so I wanted to touch on three things. When we think about the unseen impacts that students were facing during COVID, and even that they're facing now, we had a little conversation about this yesterday. We had very limited social interaction. You couldn't recognize people who weren't behind a mask when you got to meet them face to face. We had all of this going on. High schools where students are supposed to get practice interacting with instructors and peers, and that didn't exist. So, when you talk about the impact, I mean, you have to talk about everything that our students didn't get, and there's a lot of it.
Vora, one of the questions maybe you can help us unpack a little bit. So we know what they didn't get, okay? And we know what some of the differences are. So one of the things I always challenge folks is, let's not think of it, before there was Carol Dweck, there was, this carpenter from Nazareth that talked about, seeing things from a positive lens, right? That no one is broken. So our students are resilient, they have all these things. How do we, right? How do we then change? So knowing what you know, right, as a TRIO director, SSS director, how has your practice changed knowing that the students have changed, right? They're different. How you serve them has to be different. So how has your program become more student ready? And you have a new SSS program. So I don't even know, because you were doing ETS, I think, before, right? Or Upward Bound.
UB,
So,
UB.
right, UB. So how has that changed since the before time? How have you changed in your practice and your approach and become more student ready, knowing that students need to be served differently in this new world?
To answer that question, Adam, first I'm going to say that for me, I didn't have to change a whole lot. There was a lot that I had to do, but I've always been very student focused, very student centered, very hands on with my students. So coming into a director's position with SSS, it really made me think about, especially moving through COVID. How am I going to reach these students that I can't touch? I can't physically touch them, you know. Um, and so, working with my staff and trying to create ways that we could actually reach out to students, that we could actually pull them into our program, because I had to get 75% of my participants my first year without any way to really contact them. So using these formats, these electronic formats were one of the ways that I was actually able to kind of reel students in. But even coming to campus and letting students know that if they needed to stop by, that they could, or if they needed to set up a Zoom, that they could. So making myself more accessible. I think that was one way. In a way, it was a little challenging, because oftentimes you have to meet students where they are, and if they can't meet at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and that's within your shift, you have to meet them at 7, 8 o'clock at night, when they can actually meet with you. So those are some of the things that I did. To be honest with you, it's hard to recall everything that we had to do, but there was a lot of conversation coming together with programs and figuring out what was working for some programs, what could work with our programs. And at the time, I was in West Virginia, and we started these weekly meetings of Upward Bound programs in the state of West Virginia, where we just shared ideas, where we came together, where we brought our students together for movie nights and stuff like that, so that they could have more of that interaction.
Love it. Love it. Because, I mean, it's all real, right? I mean, there are things that we did to adjust, and then things that we have to be doing now, right? Because for all of us who are on campuses, right, Jamal, myself, Shanice, Avora, Christine, this is the smallest number. In 2 years, our entire campus are going to be these students, right, who have experienced front row and personal basically more trauma than any generation in the history of this planet, right? And they have to be served differently. Shanice, can you talk a little bit about, because I think the piece that's interesting that Avora is talking about that also rings true to athletics. People think athletics, well, you have all this money. Well, no, football at Alabama has money. That isn't being shared on the academic side in the same way, right? So what are some of the things that you do to ensure that your students get the support that they need, right? How are you meeting them where they are to support them in ways that helps them be successful, that are the kind of things that would work for any student? Does that make sense? Is that a good question?
Yeah, I think that, like you said, and with these students, like we have to meet them where they are, and we know that all of these students are different in terms of where they come from, the type of trauma that they've experienced, any type of circumstances that they've gone through. So I always make sure, especially when it's, talking to these students, just knowing that they are people, first and foremost, and letting them know that it's okay to be a person. It's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to be sad. Letting them know that like their feelings are valid. So that's something that I really try to make sure that I do, but I try to make sure that I'm just extremely present. I think it can be, especially here at Alabama. I am the advisor for ladies track and ladies golf. I worked with football before this for close to 4 years, and I absolutely love all of the student athletes, but it's very different, just like Adam said, in terms of, you know, the resources and things that certain students get or whatever the case is like that. So what I try to do is make sure that my students know that I am there for them, and I'm talking about in every facet that they need. You know, my girls will come to me, especially my international students. I work with a lot of international students, and some of the challenges that they go through that I would never even think of or experience, even though I might look like them. So like, I think that we learn from each other in the same way, but it's giving them the support that they need. You know, sometimes they're not able to voice, you know, what they feel like they need, or they feel like they don't have the necessary resources that they have. So it's always me going to like a type of battlefield. You know, I'm coming to the person that I know is going to be able to give these students these resources, and I'm laying it all out like, hey, you know, this student doesn't have a car, you know, so they're not able to come here and take advantage of tutoring, and they need this support so they can persist and be able to graduate, is what we're here for. But if that's not going to be able to work, like, how do we make that like work? It might be able to work for other students, you know, but like that's not the case for everyone. So I think me being able to have the experience working on the football side and then being able to work on the Olympic side where the resources are a little bit different is very interesting to kind of see where the divide lies. But I think that the biggest piece is the actual person, me, making that impact, actually wanting to be a difference maker in their life. One of my students said that they were indebted, yeah, to me, and I was just like, that's huge, like for you to feel like I've helped you that much in order for you to be able to get to where you're going. But like, I also want them to be able to see that they've grown within that process. So I think that like I'm a devil's advocate, but I'm also like that angel on your shoulder at the same time. So I feel like you play a lot of different roles within it. And that's just kind of how it works, I think. So I don't know if that necessarily answered your question, but it's a lot of different things, kind of like Dr. Baker was saying. It's just like, okay, like sometimes these students aren't able to, you know, their practice all the time, tutoring and this and that, especially with athletics. It's just trying to nail down even a time that they can sit down and focus. And it's like, we've just, you know, came from practice, you know, we came from training, all these different things. And now you're expecting us to sit down and read and, you know, look at this material and this work. And it's not like these students even asked to do these things. So it's just, I think it's also in the field in which I'm in and the place that I'm in and working with these athletes and knowing that these athletes do a lot of the time go pro and things like that, is getting them to also see the importance behind their degree. So I think it's a lot of different things in which that we try to compromise, make things work. Like our students, especially international, when you think about it, they don't even have like internet connection and things at home. So they want to go home and be able to do those things, and they're missing their families and they haven't seen them due to COVID. So it's like you're thinking of all of these different things that like you necessarily wouldn't be experiencing, even though you are experiencing it just in a different way. So for me, I think it's just trying to take myself out of my own issues and trying to see like what else someone else has going on, because I'm very quick, especially with my girls, to be like, you need to do this. Like, I don't want to hear it. Like, you need to be an advocate for yourself. You need to speak up for yourself. Like, we need to be strong. At the same time, like, I also need to know that they are students and they are learning, and I was just like them as well. So it's also me dialing it back, because I'm quick to be like, come on. But it's like, okay, come on, but I love you. So different things.
Well, and I mean, the reason why I had trio and athletics talk first is because it's exactly the same. I was a college student athlete and a college coach. And I started in this business after nonprofit world, because what is the foot washing, table tipping work that you can do in higher ed? Trio, right? And make sure you get some benefits, because that's kind of nice. And so that's how a lot of us got into the work. And then you try to amplify it for the whole campus. Can we do what they do in athletics and do what they've done in trio since 1965 for the entire campus. And what is it? It's relational, it's intrusive, it's holistic. I remember when I would say intrusive and people would say, don't say that. It just feels so off-putting. Look, shoot, I had people had to bang on my door to get me to graduate. That feels like love. And students now more than ever, it's the reason you swaddle babies, right? Christine, you got babies. It's the reason why you swaddle them, because they know where the edges are. That doesn't only feel warm, it feels comfortable. Try to take swaddling off a baby. They're reaching and they don't know where to go. They lose it. And so what we've done is create institutions that are, I always say, when you go on a campus tour, we have 280 campus organizations. If you don't have one that suits your interests, you can start one. Can you imagine going through all, students are like, what? I mean, this is just too much. I was walking out of the student center today, Jamal, where your office is, and saw a student and her mom and dad. They had just come from transfer orientation, and they were sitting huddled around the student's laptop. So that's not good. I've been doing this a long time. Mom's, of course, mom is the one typing, and I can feel it. Something's going on. So the student had finished orientation and still felt like, I don't have my classes right. I don't feel good. I'm a transfer student from Illinois. I had never even been on the University of Kentucky's campus. So then I intrude. Hey, how you guys doing? Can I help? What's going on? We end up walking the student over to our office, handing her to our director, making sure, giving her a campus tour, all of those things, because that's the kind of intrusion I learned in TRIO. That's what I learned in athletics. But what we can't do in the advising rest of campus world, right, Jamal, is say, we can't do it because TRIO can do it because of X, right? When athletics can do it because they have all these resources and they give them Scott, please. Those students are working a Fortune 500 job at Alabama, and they are killing it. Shanice, I'm going to tell one quick story about you, and then Rose, Christine, I'm going to ask you a question. Shanice and I are sitting at the house one day, and she's talking. All of a sudden, she gets a text, you know, always getting text, and she says, oh, that's Pat. Well, Pat is one of her former students who's in the NFL, right? And it's the middle of the NFL season. It's like a Thursday or a Wednesday. He's in the middle of playing. His dream was to go to the NFL, right? And he's texting Shanice to say, hey, Shanice, I'm thinking of coming back and finishing my degree. Now, he just left for the NFL a year earlier. So it wasn't, we have to learn how they do that. There isn't one of my normal students who, if you gave them $15 million in the job of their dream, would be texting me to say, hey, Adam, I want to come back and go to the University of Kentucky. There is, who does that? I mean, that's just, and then you tell Shanice and the athletics people, you all know that's special, right? Well, no, why is that special? Because he's making the money he wanted to make. He's doing the career he wanted to do, but he's texting you, my kid, which is even cooler, that he thought of you in the middle of his work life and his work day and said, I want to come back and finish that degree, and you're the way I can do it. That takes Avora, right? That's like
Right,
mapping
right.
on Pete. That's crazy. Okay. I mean,
Rookie
and
season.
Pat Surtain is a bad boy. Okay, I'm just telling you. I mean, one of the best corners in the NFL. But Shanice never sees Najee or Pat or Tua as anything different but students. Just like our students that are doctors now and engineers now, they're just our students. It's the exact same thing. So what we're going to do in the next quarter, in the next 3 months, is we're going to bring a bunch of athletic academic services and development people on just to unpack their practice, because we need to lean into practitioners rather than not pay attention to the great best practice that's happening on our campuses, right? Whether it's athletics or it's TRIO or it's the MLK Center or it's the work Christine and her team are doing. Christine, can you talk a little bit? Because when I started in higher ed, people told me we don't hire social workers and human service people because we're not a social service agency. We don't want to help all these folks. Social workers want to solve all their problems, and that's really not why we're here. We're here to get them classes, right? Can you talk a little bit about the things you've learned in your social work training that is so applicable, because you have a great team, right?
Mhm.
With like an 85% graduation rate in STEM disciplines. I mean, science, math, engineering, technology, 85. National average is about 47. So
Mhm.
what are some of the things that you've learned as a social worker, an MSW, that
Mhm.
has translated not only to your work with students, but your work with your team, especially in this season of us needing to be more student ready? What are the kind of things that we need to do and our institutions need to do from the mind of a social worker to be more student ready?
Mm. So I think the biggest thing is basic needs, right? So our students come, and Shanice, you talked a little bit about this, right? Our students come to us, and like that student that you said, Adam, was overwhelmed, right? Are they getting their basic needs met? Are you eating? Are you sleeping? We just started our summer bridge program this past Sunday. We had move-in day, and we had a student that is severe anxiety, and mom called us. So we brought mom in. Mom is in her circle. So we talked to mom. We're talking to student. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Is this class too much for you? What is going on, right? So I think those are the most important things when we're meeting with our students right now, especially in this global pandemic that we're still in, is meeting our students for their basic needs and then going into the difficult conversations, right? Why are you here? What is your why? What do you want to do with this degree? All those types of things. But if you're not sleeping and if you're not eating and if you're having a panic attack before you go to class, I can't get into why do you want to be an engineer conversation because your basic needs aren't being met. So those are some of the things that I think from my social work background, and then understanding that there's so much more to a student that just number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's a case management piece that you need to take care of. So are they seeing their therapist? Are they having those conversations with their professors before class or after class? And how am I coaching you and how to talk to your professors? I mean, you write me an email and it's a yo sup, and I'm like, that's not how you write an email. You can write an email to me this way, but not to Dr. So and so, right? So coaching them in all these different things and meeting the student where they're at. I think another thing that I wanted to jump in before was, again, with our summer bridge program now, there's the letter of the law, but then there's the spirit of the law. And these students, we really need to understand that they do not know anything more so than they've ever not known before, right? Because they were not in school for so long. Nobody was teaching them, nobody was coaching them and talking to them about how to get college ready. So now we're just expecting them to be understanding, oh, financial aid is over here, you can just walk over to this office. No, we need to walk our students to the financial aid office. We need to hand them off to Susie at the financial aid office because Susie has been working with these students for so long. So it's those interpersonal connections that we need to help those students make. And I think that's another part of it as well, is coaching them and doing that special handoff more so now than ever before, because they've never done this before. And yes, they're resilient, but we need to know that their anxiety is at an all-time high and we need to coach them and mentor them in that.
Well, and Christine, Arrested Development just isn't a TV show, right?
Right.
It wasn't just a hip hop group in the 90s, right? I mean, Arrested Development is real. And it's when trauma happens, your development stops.
Yep.
So you moved in X number of rising freshmen who may be physically 17, 18, but they may developmentally be 14 when the trauma happened or younger, right? And so that means we can say over and over, there's no one on here that works at a private school, okay? We all work for the people, right? We don't just work for the students, we work for the people, right? And I think we forget that. There's no business in the history of this planet you can have worse results and everybody get paid, right? I mean, that's just crazy, right? The TRIO program that Avora runs at the community college has to have better results than the community college does with students who are more a challenge. I mean, that's insane, right? I mean, Avora, you better be at 85% graduation, sis, and then the community college sitting there at about 30, right? I mean, just throwing out a number. Those are some of the challenges in our industry, and we sometimes forget, because it's our job, that we're working in the people's institution and in the student's home. They live there. we just work there, right? It's one of the things when institutions, we hate change, too much change. But this isn't your house that's changing. They didn't change the paint color on your house. We're changing stuff for the people who live here to benefit them, to serve them, right? Because the world has changed. What they need has changed. We have to assume they know nothing and we need to teach it, right? How to send an email, how to talk to a professor, how to walk over and have these conversations and dialogues. And I think, Christine, even the little stuff, like teaching our colleagues, Tyrone is asking, how do we make our colleagues student ready, right? Well, we have colleagues that don't know what it means when you say work a caseload. They don't know what that looks like. Like in my world, those are your guys. Okay, those are yours. In the end, you're writing prescriptions. That has nothing to do with you. Work, you control your calendar, you're responsible for your students, you make sure you make it happen because they're yours. That's a very different philosophy. And then the team approach that social work is grounded in, right, is that together as a team, we manage these 300 clients or these 300 students. And your contribution is this, and your contribution is that, and we work it together. Like you said, bottom line, all the theory is important. All of us higher ed nerds, Aspen and Tinto and all those people are great. Terrell's theory on belonging, fantastic. But it's all Maslow, man. If you aren't safe, it doesn't. And people used to roll their eyes when you'd say Maslow in higher ed. No, come up with something even more schwanky and scholarly. Well, a global pandemic taught us, like, if you aren't safe and you aren't eating and you don't have water, none of the rest of it matters. And that's really why we're all there. If we can teach them the school part, great. But we are founded for the people, and our students are the people, period, right? Jamal, one of the things that...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, H. Lou.
Adam, I just want to say one thing before we shift, is that, the question is a really important question, right? Around how do we help colleges understand or colleagues how to be student ready? But I think the first piece, which I actually don't know if we've actually named quite yet, is what is a student ready college? We've talked about student-centeredness, we've talked about services, but I do want to just, like, I'm the pause person, right? Like, let's talk about our collective nervous system here. Are we on the right context, right? Saying, what does it mean for us to actually change and recognize who colleges were initially made for, who is meant to be retained, who is not, and then what does it mean for us as practitioners to acknowledge the need, right, to become student-ready colleges versus students becoming college-ready, right? There's a tension there, and it also requires a perspective shift for many folks who aren't necessarily in TRIO or Upward Bound, or I came from multicultural affairs or advising with athletes, right? So I just want to pause us and say, have we defined that yet for everybody to know what we mean when we say that?
No, it's a really good question. I think what Andrea is bringing up is really interesting, because this is another example, and I think it's hard for us to know what student ready looks like, because the institutions are not built for the people who pay and who live there, and they were created under the same systems that weren't made. Somebody said, well, I feel X, Y, and Z here at a PWI, and they're a person of color. Well, they weren't made for you and mine, right? I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, if we were offering classes the way students need them, we'd be offering 8-week courses where you take 2, right? And then you pivot. It's one of the ways that, Andrea's question about hiding behind FERPA, it's just what we do, so we don't have to deal with anything. I mean, I could tell you, I work for a mayor and we dealt with FERPA, and FERPA is not the monster under the bed that we make it to be. Because what FERPA also, it isn't just don't tell a student's information to somebody who you aren't authorized. It's also complying with the student's wishes and informing the student about their rights under FERPA, just like HIPAA at CVS or Walgreens, right? You have to do that. And so there's nothing wrong with using FERPA proactively. Shanice does it all the time. Evora does it all the time, right? Trio does that all the time. If I know a student is a Trio student at Kentucky and they were in Trio in high school, I'm calling the Trio director. I don't care. That's the way we roll, right? FERPA is also about using the village. And so saying to a student, and I think, Heather, one of your points is really good, is we become student ready if we realize that our colleges and universities are not the student's village, that every student has a village, right? We are, how many of us right now today are working full time, Evora, taking classes, got a side hustle, caring for a dependent, an elderly parent, or something. Then when I ask you to list all the things you have in your life, how important are those classes really? And then we say to our students, this should be the most important thing. Really? Really should it? You know, so students have whole villages of people that are important to them. A pastor, a coach, a family member, a friend boy, a friend girl, a partner, this person. Why are we not leaning on those people to help us support the students? Why are we using FERPA as some, because FERPA was written in 1974, right? It was written for very different reasons that, like Christine said, that we are not complying with the spirit of. That's not what FERPA was there for. FERPA is there to protect people from releasing their information to all these sources. It was not to not lean on a student's village and to say to somebody a student has said, hey, my friend Heather, that's my person. So if you're wondering about what's going on with me, poke her. See, that's student ready to me, right? If a student says that's my village, that's my person, why am I not calling Heather like Shanice does when one of her students isn't going to class and saying, hey, not to tell, hey, Heather, what's going on with your friend? I'm really concerned. I haven't seen them in a while. I'm hoping, because now the student then sees us as part of their village, because we're, rather than a drive-through mailbox, essentially, was what we've become. Jamal, can you talk about in your work what being student ready looks like? Because you all are everything, right, in the MLK Center, and you have these engagement things. And we've also had students not be as engaged in campus programming and activities in the same way that they were before, just differently. Can you talk about, to you, what being student ready means to you and your work, and what you're doing in your work to translate that to the rest of the campus? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. So when I think about the work we're doing in our cultural center, is because we primarily work with our students of color. To be student ready is to recognize that they are already coming with a multitude of both needs and expectations of the institution, right? And because we are in times, particularly for those who work at historically white institutions, right? For our Black and Brown students, they're already coming with some questions about, do I belong, right? And if they have gone through any recruitment processes where they talk about diversity and all these different things, right? To be student ready means they're coming to ask the questions. They're coming to make sure that the institution is about what they are talking about. And most times, offices like us, which do have the support of folks of color and who care and do work around identity and students of color, right? We are often the people who are immediately supposed to be ready to tap in, right, and connect with these students. And to Adam's point, what we have seen because of the realities of COVID, student engagement obviously has looked a lot differently. People don't know to look for an office like mine, right? They don't know where their people are. And so we have had to really reposition ourselves to not just throw out a whole bunch of programs and services and think that it's going to land, right? We have to really think intentionally about how do we first get them to come in and see that this is a space of access and community, right? And then also, as you start to become familiar with our center, because we know there are more needs than just talking about diversity or your identities and backgrounds. There are other issues that are impacting you, and there are other people that you need to be tapped into. And so I am very unapologetic about walking a student over to other resources on campus, whether that is the counseling center, um, you know, even just today, right, we have a transfer student who just started this summer. But some of the things he was telling me, I called Adam and I said, Adam, I need you to connect with this student because one, I want him to not only feel comfortable with me, but also with other folks because we want them to have that village support. We recognize that this institution and none of our institutions were built with these students in mind. And so we have to, for me, be student ready and be proactive in helping them find those folks who want to see them not only be successful, but you know, build up other students as well. So,
Jamal, no, it's really good. And it's interesting, the student that you sent over, he wouldn't leave. I mean, I had a meeting from 8:30 until 12:30, and our admin said, well, he's waiting. And um, she said, well, I tried to get him to come back at 1, and he said he'll wait. And then you end up, Heather Lou, finding out, Ivor, you know Minnesota, he's from Brooklyn Park and Liberian and knows our friend Georgette. I mean, of course, look at God, right? And so you end up, you know, it's just going above and beyond, right? Christine, talk a little bit about, because what I'm hearing is belonging, right? How do we, because part of this is saying you belong, but we've always said that you belong here. That was our recruitment stuff, right? You belong here, right? Until you can't pay the bill, right? So just saying, or until you are academically struggling and then we kick you to the curb, even though you want to be here, because we're seeing numbers right now out of this freshman class. I mean, unheard of stuff. Like, we knew that students would academically struggle, and they have ridiculous amounts. Y'all who are in a higher ed space know that. But what we're seeing, like, I can pick on one institution, record numbers of students eligible for suspension after their first year, but almost half of them registered for fall. Like, that normally doesn't, students who are eligible to be suspended as freshmen, that means they're not going to class. Because if you go to class as a freshman, you aren't going to get suspended. You're going to do fine. So usually students who aren't going to class are not checking email, meeting with advisors, getting their hold lifted, registering for classes. But that number of students who are usually suspension eligible that register for term is about 20%. We're almost at 50%. Like, they aren't ready to be in school, but they have to be at school. Like, they don't want to go anywhere else. They're scared out of their mind. So then the question is, how do institutions by and for the people serve them there? Heather, it's like dealing with drug addicts, right? Hey, look, just walk into treatment. If you want to be at treatment and recognize the need, then we have to totally change our mindset to stop thinking we're some elite academic spaces and start recognizing what being public flagship land grant institutions means. And, you know, flagship is leadership, land grant is service, right? And making sure we're doing that. Christine, can you talk a little bit about the summer program? Because it's about 10 years that y'all have been running the summer program. Talk a little bit about the intentionality about creating belonging, that you can't just say to students, oh, we have these services and resources and space, but how are you intentionally telling students they have a tribe and a village here?
It starts from day one. So it starts from when you're initially recruiting the students, right, and telling them, we want you in our program and this is for you because for whatever reason, so we're very honest in our office. I don't know why institutions don't want to be honest with students, but we let them know, hey, look, you started off here, okay? And I know you want to be an engineer, but it's going to take you some time if you're in fundamentals or algebra for calc or pre-calc, right? But if you really want to do this, we are going to be here and we're going to support you and we're going to love you and we're going to coach you all the way through. And we create this family from the beginning, from day one. So day one, we're telling them, hey, this is our program, etc. And then we have our move-in day. So move-in day is a family atmosphere. Families come in, the students bringing their you know, carts and everything. We even have a meal as a family together, and then we have our welcome session, all that kind of stuff. So right from day one, we're creating this cohort mentality that you are in this together. And then I even tell the families, I even tell the parents, I'm like, I'm gonna watch your child like if it was my own this summer, and I will let them know if anything's going on. So the cohort mentality, and we let the students know that we're in this together all day from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. when they're in study tables all day long, and then through our college readiness class where we're talking about life stuff and the isms and all that kind of stuff. So I think it also has to do with space and our office space and how we treat our students from when they walk in. Our office space is very welcoming environment for them, so they get to feel like home as well. And we make it a home environment. I mean, even yesterday, the Wi-Fi was down in another office, and then they had to come to our office, and we're over here with our MiFis and opening up windows and having fans and stuff in so the students get all comfortable. So it's just letting them know that we have struggled as well. A lot of us in our office are first generation students as well, and a lot of life stuff that got in the way. So I think that's another thing as well, Adam, is letting them know that we've been in the struggle too. We've never been through a global pandemic before, and we're still trying to build the plane as it flies together with you, and we're going to support you in that as well, and letting them know that we've been through stuff too, and that we're going to support them. I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, it really does. I think it's, you know, students, everybody knows Smith has been kicked out of college more than once. Now that's crazy, but I remember that guy. I remember that it was by the grace of God I got a degree in theology. It was the grace of God giving me Tim Maschke, who banged on my door and said, "Get your butt out here. What the heck is wrong with you?" Bottom line is, and a couple of takeaways for y'all, right? Everybody, all our participants, what things do we do that are optional? Like, I don't do optional. I'm a grown man with grandbabies, and optional and me don't work well. You imagine if the IRS said, Avora, hey, it's optional, sis. Or your job said, well, it's optional if you show up. Ain't none of us coming. Why do we expect students to interact with us differently than we interact with everything in our lives? And then we put these false ideas on them, like, well, they didn't show up, they should be here. Well, we aren't anywhere. I mean, the only thing we show up to is, you know, something streaming on Netflix. So those are the realities. We don't do optional. So intrusive is mandatory. When you say to a student, being in this program requires that you do this, it feels like love, right? I'm making you do this because I love you. And in the end, they can do what they want, right? And sometimes I love you, I got to let you go. But in the end, it's saying this is required. That's why athletics works. Everybody's walking around in crimson. Everybody has upperclassmen helping them accountable to the standard. Everybody is saying, look, you immediately belong because everybody has the same stuff. Christine, are you still making them walk to class together?
yes, we do. They walk to class together as a cohort to their specific classes, and the tutor mentor is there and meets them there, and they're held accountable. And then they all report back whether they did or didn't go. And we always tell them, which is actually something that I learned from you, Mr. Smith. Day one, you're representing yourself, you're representing your family, you're representing the program, and you're representing the university. So this is bigger than just you, oh, I'm going to be late to class, right? So it's a family feel, it's a cohort feel. And these students are the ones that are actually going to lead the next cohort of incoming freshmen in the fall, right? And then these are the leaders that lead the rest of the other cohort of students in our program. So, oh yeah, there's a reason for the madness.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, making t-shirts that say scholar on them for a bunch of misfit toys. Because you put scholar on a shirt, I mean, they won't ever take it off. They're walking around, I'm a scholar. Oh, I've never been called a scholar before. Having them be accountable and meet in the residence hall, you know, on the first floor and say, okay, everybody who's going to calc, I'm the captain of the calc group, we're walking to class together. Because then it's just not about me. We're immediately intentionally and purposefully creating belonging. It's really interesting when Christine and the crew, Freeman Urbowski from who is at Maryland, Baltimore County, and has done amazing work. When he came and visited Akron, he was like, wait a minute, so y'all are doing that too? Yeah, we are. And nobody knew about each other. Like that same walk to class, required study table, supplemental instruction, sociocultural pieces that build community and belonging in an intentional way. Shanice, can you talk a little bit about how athletics, right, built belonging with you in college, right? And how you try to do that with your students, you know, so that they know that they belong at Bama because you're there. But how do you do that in a way that's a little bit more intentional, right? You can't just say you belong here. So what are some of the things you do to make them feel like they have community there and you care about them?
Yeah, there's different programming that we have here for our student athletes, especially when they come in. Same as she was kind of saying, same as like Bridge, kind of getting them acclimated to their new environment, kind of what's expected of them. So coming in with those individuals that are just like them, just coming straight out of high school. We even have those that especially with football, like they will graduate early. So they're coming in and they're not even um, have their high school degree. So it's thinking about the differences within that. So it's a lot of like the cohortness, kind of piggybacking off of what Christine said. But I think that it's making sure that I think that their sense of belongingness like can come from a lot of different things. I think that like it's their environment in which they come in, do their academics, or their environment in which they are over with their athletics or their coaches or whatever the case. I think it's like a collective kind of thing. But I think it's just overall intentionality. I think it's just being present. I think it's just connecting those students to the resources that they know that they need and connecting them to the resources that they don't know that they don't need yet. Um, I don't think I do anything honestly really different than anyone else, even if it is athletics. I think that we just have a lot of moving parts and pieces that can help us in a lot of different ways. But it's getting those students to know those resources, feel comfortable taking advantage of those resources, and like actually doing it. Because like you can tell students all day long, like, hey, this is where it is. Hey, this is the person that you need, but that doesn't mean they're going to go and do it, take advantage of it. So I think that a lot of their sense of belonging is like you also kind of like teaching them that there's other aspects that they do need to make sure that they have in their toolkit in order for them to be able to move forward. So I think an overall belongingness is just being present. I don't, like I said, there isn't anything honestly that we do any different, whether it's recruiting with your families or, you're doing study hall and you see the same type of people, or you're in certain classes with certain students, or, you're in a certain major, you have the cohorts and everything that you kind of go class to class with. So I feel like there's different things in that way, but athletics, like outside of team meetings that are required, a lot of things like we know in athletics are required. So sometimes with our students, especially here, and I feel like it's different for institutions, but like it can seem forced in a sense, like, hey, I'm here to get this, degree, or I'm here to, to with my sport or whatever the case is, and I'm trying to do this, and you know, and I think that that's important, that you also need to make sure that if that's what that student wants, that you need to adhere by that, and you need to respect that, and that needs to be something that if that's their plan and that's what they want to do, then that's also what you need to make sure that you are doing to support them. So like I said, it's just very different in terms of it, but everyone has their person. I feel like it's being available. It's just, hey, can I call you at this time? Can I text you at this time? It's never ending, like, hey, can you help me with Zoom? I can't get on this tutoring appointment. It's just having someone present, but feeling like those students have that contact that they need. Because with athletics, they always think it's like a one-stop shop. It's like, absolutely not. Like, I'm here to make sure that you are eligible. I'm here to make sure that you get your degree, but like, there's also a ton of people on campus, those interpersonal relationships that you need to build in order for you to be able to build that resume. Because it's not going to be, hey, I'm going to go to grad school. Who do I use as a reference? Like, we need to have those connections kind of like nailed down. So I think that it all starts, like Christine said, with day one, but it's also the students also being intentional too. Like, hey, I think I might need this, or hey, like I heard about this, like can you help me with it? So it's the students also doing their part as well. So I look at it as an overall like partnership, you know, like you bring it to the table and I'm bringing it to the table. And even though like the students might not know, they're still old enough to be able to say like, hey, Shanice, you know, I heard about this, or, you know, hey, Shanice, I heard that there was, you know, a Project ID. We have a program here called Project ID that's specifically for our students of color, so that they have a sense of space, belonging, especially after COVID. They're trying to figure out, you know, like what do we do like for these students, especially because with our students, a lot of it's, you know, like, hey, like I'm here to my sport, you know, and like, but there's other students that like really aren't. So it's like we have to make sure that we're meeting everybody. So I don't know, like I keep always saying, like if I answered your question, but
No,
that
you
sense of
answered the
belongingness,
question.
I think, comes
Well,
from
and
them and
I
us at the
think,
same time.
well, and I think what you're saying that resonates so well is, and because Shanice is my kid, if y'all didn't know, she minimizes, well, hey, Shanice, but how do they know Shanice is the person and she's going to respond? Like if I could get my entire University of Kentucky campus to do that, where students were like, hey, Adam, do you know what intentionality it takes for a student to realize not only am I going to ask you a question if it's in my brain, but you're going to answer it, right?
And feel
And I'm going to have
comfortable.
access, and I'm going to and feel comfortable asking you anything that you essentially. So one crazy story was teaching classes. Always teach class every semester, and I was teaching like a FYS, and say to my students all the time when they leave, "Love you, see you tomorrow," right? And they leave, and after 2 or 3 weeks, I was hanging around getting my stuff together, and some students, we were talking or whatever. And I said, "Is it weird that I say love you?" And they said, "No, it kind of was initially, but no, not really." And I said, "Why?" "Because we know you do." And I was like, "Well, how?" "We don't know how. We just know." See, these people on this call, everybody here that's our participants, we shouldn't be weird to them. Like the whole campus should be like that. Every semester I call students at the end of the term, call 10, 15, 20 students just to tell them they did really well. Just random. Hey, this is Adam from UK. I'm not emailing them. I'm literally calling them on the telephone, if y'all even know what that is anymore. And saying to them, this is Adam from UK. I'm looking at your grades and you killed it. I see that you struggled for here, but you pulled it up. Look at this. We're so lucky to have you get part of our community. It is the biggest blessing I get at the end of every term. Forget about that they're shocked that somebody from the school calls and ain't asking for money, right? But that somebody is calling and saying, I am so proud of you. I see you. Don't leave a voicemail. I've had this past semester, I had students call me back because they see the University of Kentucky show up on their, caller ID, and they have their parents in the background and they're crying because of the voicemail I left, because no one has told them how proud they are of them. This has not been easy. You did really well. We're so honored to have you a part of our community. If you need anything, don't hesitate. And I didn't do it for them. In the end, it blesses me to make those calls, but it shouldn't be a shock. What do you mean you're calling to tell me I did well? I thought you were calling me because I was in trouble, right? That Vora, right? So I think the things that Shanice is talking about is personalized concierge service, right? I can't have, somebody was talking about something in the chat about, creating those experiences. I think the difference is in being student ready is not giving everyone the same. See, fair is not the same. We're talking about equity, justice, inclusion, those things, and that's seeing people where they are. Don't give Evora the same workout program that Simone Biles has, because that feels like you don't care about Evora. You care about Evora's goals, which her needs are, what her challenges are, what she's looking for. And if we customize it to that level for you, Evora, then it's going to feel like, you know what, this person does see me. They do care about me because it's your personalized goals. But when it's everyone gets the same thing, oh, that that doesn't work. And I think the other piece, and then Avora, I'm going to ask you the question somebody put in the chat about how we create cohort experiences for community college students. The other thing is we have to believe that we are the answer. Okay, everybody on here has worked with me before. There has never been a time in my career that I have doubted my practice. Not one time, not once, because God has given me my practice, right? Until God comes and tells me that's not how I want you to talk to my students, this how I'm gonna rock with students. Because I got too many students now that have shown me this works. Nobody believes in a brain surgeon who says, or in a heart surgeon, or in an airplane pilot that says, well, you know, I got FAA regulations, I might not be able to do. No, that doesn't work, y'all. You, to be student ready, you have to know this is what I do. This is my ministry. I know nothing else. And if you're with me, I got you. If you, and Shanae's, that's in her blood. I got you. Okay. If you listen to what I tell you to do, I'm going to love on you. I'm going to support you. I'm going to kick you in the hind parts. But I promise you, if I write the prescription and you take it, you're going to get that degree from the University of Alabama. Christine, Jamal, Heather, Avora, that's what we believe. That is what being student ready starts with. But we have all this false humility in higher ed that starts with ego. That we hide behind things like FERPA that says, oh no, we can't. If I say no, nobody sends, people are trusting us with their most precious thing, their babies. Why would they give us their most precious thing and we don't think our practice is sound? That's where you have to start. Like, I know what I'm doing. Just listen to what I'm doing and the students will see it, feel it. And if you don't know it, it's okay to say, look, I don't know, right, Janae? I got somebody on campus. Let me call the homie. Let me take you over there and hand you over to Jamal and let me show you how to talk to Jamal. Because this is my guy, right? Avora, can you talk a little bit about cohort experiences? Because you're at a community college now, right? You run an SSS program. What are the ways to build those cohorts, those villages, those learning communities that you've seen beyond SSS that are successful not only at your community college, but you know you're a whole Dr. Baker now. So
Yeah, that don't mean nothing yet. No, but you know, this whole idea of this cohort experience, and I think that's what we do so well as trio professionals. Let me give a disclaimer first. This is I started off in at a 2-year institution in White Bear Lake, Minnesota, and I just came back after being several years at a 4-year institution. And when I came back, I was so excited, but there were so many challenges. I had so many challenges with not having students readily on campus, and then coming in through COVID. So creating that cohort, you have to be intentional. I know we've said this over and over throughout this call, but being intentional. So I don't care what your students are doing. If they're all taking a college readiness course here at CVCC, we call it SDV 100. If they're all taking that course, you have to get those students outside of the classroom together so that they can learn from each other, so that they can be a part of each other. So there's one thing that we are working on here at CVCC, and that's creating like a 8-week courses for students that are taking like English 100 or Math 100 or whatever class they're taking, but keeping those students together, creating a study hall for the students in between classes. And then after the 8 weeks, they graduate to the next class for the first few semesters. But I mean, it can be in any form that you do that. It can be everybody that's taking human anatomy. We're gonna meet well, not everybody has a trio lab, but we're gonna meet here in this space, and you guys are gonna bounce ideas off of each other and helping them create that. Because it's like Shanice said, that we're out of practice. These students haven't had this opportunity, so we have to create these opportunities for them.
I love it. I love it. So Y'all, we're gonna cut in a minute, but I want to ask Jamal one more question and then let Heather take Elena's question, because Elena has a great question in the chat about balancing our own trauma, right? And again, putting the mask on ourselves first. Jamal, can you talk a little bit about some of the issues that you're dealing with like, we're back to belonging again, right? And as a kid who went to college, as someone who went to college in the 90s, you know, we fought for spaces like a Black Cultural Center, and we fought for all of these. We have to have our own. We have to have our own. But one of the things that I know you and your work and your practice has been is really about some of these intersections that students are having and feeling like, okay, we need to have place and space, but there's this whole broader, I, I hate to use the word diaspora, right? Where students want space and place, but they also want space and place to move freely between different identities and different experiences, and how the intentionality that you're bringing to some of the work at UK and others around how do we create place and space that deals with students who feel comfortable in a whole bunch of different identity laden spaces, where then you don't feel so isolated, right? We were fine back in Do the Right Thing, Fight the Power to feel isolated in the BSU. You remember that, Ivora. We were good with that. But this is a very, very different world, and a very, very different, sometimes feeling isolated also feels vulnerable, right? Because I'm sitting in a fishbowl, or I'm sitting and, you know, we get nervous going to the grocery store, right? I mean, that's a trauma thing. And our students, see, there's safety in numbers, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. So Jamal, can you talk about things students are talking about, and then some of the intentionality that you've been unpacking around intersectional spaces to create that sense of intentional safety and belonging with our students?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, we've learned a few things, right? And we've already been talking about this. One size literally does not fit all. And even when we think about for our students of color, we have had to really not only unpack ourselves, but unpack with students that these racialized identities are not monolith. And so a lot of our conversations when we think about how do we not only recognize the intersectionality that of our students' lived experiences, but how do we also push the students to think about who's not in the room when we're having certain conversations and certain events. And the challenge that we face, right, is I think we are trying to capture what I say is like this both and approach. And so we want to try to cultivate space, right, for particularly our Black and brown students, or we'll just say, because they'll ask, well, why can't we have something to ourselves? We always have to share. And so how do we cultivate a space where maybe our Black students feel like, all right, this is a conversation in a setting where I feel like I can unapologetically be myself, right, and talk how I want to and not feel like I'm excluding someone else. But even in those conversations, how do we make sure that we're not perpetuating that there's one type of Blackness to be in those conversations? In addition to when we're supporting, our Latinx students, or our LGBTQ students, right, which is an area that we are growing in, right? Because a lot of times our cultural centers, if you have, at our campus, we do have an office for LGBTQ resources. And sometimes, right, we even have a blinder when we're thinking about certain topics. And so, to answer your question, the work that we're doing is really recognizing that we have to start to work and reach out to folks who are not a part of the even dominant groups in our spaces, right? And so if we're just seeing African American and Latinx students in our space, where and how are we reaching out to our other communities, whether those are folks who identify as Asian, or those who identify as Middle Eastern, or have a more different ethnic salience, right, that's not represented in the space, and collaborate with student organizations and folks who are there to support that, so that they see that there is, right, value in space and being connected to the MLK Center. Because at the end of the day, what we have been trying to push for our students is we are more than just a space. The size of our space currently, right, can only accommodate about 60 students. And so when you think about working at this large institution, and even if we're thinking just students from marginalized backgrounds, that is much more than 60 students. And so there is no way we can fit them all into our little bitty space and feel like everybody is being served. And so we have to go out. We have to be intentional about our partnerships. We have to challenge our students sometimes in our space to think about how do we, what is the end goal, right? For the work that we do, what is the end goal? And it really is that all of these spaces, right, feel like home, not just the King Center. And so just recognizing too, even the realities of that, right? That part of that is to also push back on other people, right? Because it can't just be our work as the MLK Center to make our students of color or students of marginal backgrounds feel included. And so y'all have got to do some work too. So this is not the only facility that they see that's for them. And so we are, part of the process and conversation about envisioning a new kind of multicultural center on campus, and one that truly does think about the intersections of both race identity and identity as a whole, so that we're cultivating space for folks to feel affirmed in their individual identities, but also know that there is space and a necessity to come together and intersect. And so to be determined, right, where those spaces are going, but I do feel confident in our institution, but also in a lot of the conversations we're having that we will be going in that direction.
Well, and that, Jamal, that is so different from how us 90s activists, Evora, I'm gonna pick on you again, approach stuff. We were so busy fighting. I mean, we're here, right? And the difference is with current students, they want to make space for their brothers and sisters who are LGBTQ, right? Or they are intersectional that too, right? They want to, yes, in Kentucky right now, we don't have big old Asian populations and indigenous populations, but those intersectional identities are going to grow. Working in Minnesota, Blackness is a whole different thing. You have Somali, you have Liberian, you have Black American, you have Afro-Latinos, and so you have to name that, right? And so you need to give people space so they don't feel like I have to traumatize myself or others to go here. And so the beauty of it is not the old school multicultural center where you water down cultural identities, but a new school like diaspora space of identity where there are spaces for each group or identity, but the students can seamlessly move. And then there's community spaces where community can be shared across those areas. That's kind of, now that's very 2025, 26, but that's the kind of vision that I think is something that ensures we're student ready, and not just ready for these students, but ready for the students in 6 years, where it's going to be even more intersectionality.
Yeah, and I think to that point though, it's even as we design and think through those spaces, that we're not thinking about it in a space of permanency, because
Right.
as you said, our students are evolving. And so even as you talked about, it's not that we don't have right students who have those same mentalities from 20 years ago or even 35 years ago when our office was established. And they're not wrong, right? They're not wrong to an extent. But how do we also recognize that there are other right values and folks who can also benefit from these type of spaces, right? That may not always aren't always going to be the people who have an activist mentality, right? And how do we cultivate that and save room for them as well? Because those might be the students who need us the most, right? And so those are things that I think about we have to be conscious of even as we design space and initiative.
Well, and as you and I, and it's the last piece I'll say about it, Heather, because I know you tried to jump in. As you and I have talked through this, talked about spaces, we talked about all these different visions, right? Because I got to get out of the way because I want to be in the cut. Avoid, what I'm talking about, Christine, what I'm talking about, shrink south, in the cut, right? But then you recognize the only students that come to the cut are students that are coming to the cut, if that makes sense. Those are students you already got. But how do these spaces and these opportunities become a fly trap, right? Students walking by, they don't feel like they belong. They're not going to ask a question. They're imposter. This ain't for me. This isn't for me. This isn't for me. How does it immediately grab you and say, no, this is for you. Come on, sis, right? Those are those opportunities that I think a future focused mind can help us do, because it can be yes and. You can have your affinity space. You can have your Black space or your Latino space. You can have your LGBTQ space while at the same time having space for everyone, which creates more space for more Black LGBTQ, because there's a whole bunch of folks with those identities who aren't engaged and aren't being successful on our campuses. Heather, can you talk? You're my trauma superstar. Can you talk, Elena? We love Elena. Oh, Elena's always in the space. Can you talk a little bit about ensuring that we are taking good care of ourselves, knowing that we've talked about, carrying a lot of this for our students, and not just for our students, for our campuses, right? We are the voices in the world. There aren't many of us. That's why this space is so important. Can you talk about those care pieces and how we unpack our trauma? Give us, and then bring us home, sister.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I'm just gonna name how I'm reading the question, which will provide some of the context of like how I'm responding. So the question that Elena said is, I love this, but how do faculty and staff balance their own trauma and issues with helping students, right? There's a lot of different ways for people to navigate this. Sorry, there's a little human blasting music outside my house. Get it, it's good. So if you hear it, I'm not sorry, it's great. So I have a lot of thoughts about this, but first and foremost, so I used to serve as an advocate and a confidential resource at an institution. And so let's talk about like trauma, right? People showing up, disclosing, sharing different aspects of violence, domestic, sexual violence, harassment, discrimination, a lot of the times with intersections around several of our social identities, right? I think something that I had to be very clear about with myself and the people that I supervise and am in relationship with is that I can't be everything for everyone. And I think that's true in being a student ready, practitioner and or to build a group and a team of practitioners with this approach, right? There needs to be understandings of self and what are my boundaries, what are my limits, what am I doing when I'm already starting to feel exhausted. I think for me, having a very clear understanding for myself of like my role is a helping professional. I am not a counselor, right? I am not a physician. I'm looking at Christine because I used to supervise some of the like social work students, right, in their practice, and part of this was really identifying, right, like what are my limitations, and then also what are my networks and resources of support, right? So I cannot be the person that is helping a student with all of their academic needs. However, I can intentionally connect them with Shanice because you know what? They're an athlete and maybe I don't know the right person, but I can have, a process of creating a connection, right? I think that for me, part of that was practicing what are my limits? Where does my trauma lie if I have the access to those resources? And then also saying, I know that when it comes to domestic violence, specifically around this population, I know that that is not going to be my strong suit and I need to know who the other resources are, right? I think that something that really is challenging in a lot of our spaces is that when we think about being student ready practitioners, that also, connects with this like savior complex. And I don't believe in that, right? Like that, I see some people like nodding their head and smiling, right? But some of us are like, oh, I need to be everywhere all the time. I need to be there from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. That is a surefire way of not having a sustainable practice, right? And or how are we, going to continue on, right, in terms of our leadership and our practice moving forward. And so I had a lot of conversations with myself, with the people I supervised about, okay, so then where are the sticky points? Where are the hard points? What are the moments where I know that I am in over my head? And what does it look like to be a community asking for support? Because we need to also role model that with and for the students that we work with, and to be transparent about that. I'm glad that a student can feel comfortable, you know, coming in and being like, yo, Lou, like this stuff is going on, right? When I used to work with Adam, I worked in student life, and we all know student life is probably one of the widest spaces you could be in. And then there's me, right? And so students who weren't normally in that space were all of a sudden showing up. And then I knew that I was the first point of contact, but I was never the last. And it wasn't about me, right? I can't tell someone how to balance their trauma and their quote unquote issues, because that is some like personal work that some people need to do. However, I can have expectations as a supervisor and as a colleague around, yo, you look like you're burning from both ends, homie. What you got to do? How can I support you if I have capacity? Right? And if and when we're doing that in front of students and or like setting that tone, and also developing a culture change from white supremacy culture, which is individualistic, to a community team approach, we are going to be able to make our institutions so much stronger, especially when it comes to addressing issues of trauma, especially because everybody in this day and age has experienced some kind of trauma from 2020 until now. And we will continue to experience that because these spaces are not made for us, they are not made for students, right? And so it is our responsibility to start really looking at that, holding up the mirror, despite the fact that we have legislation that is not for us once again, right? And it is our job to create critical counter spaces and conscious places and spaces that allow people to feel like their whole selves are showing up, even in their trauma and messiness. Okay, so just saying, I have a lot of feelings about that.
That's why I have her finish, y'all.
I'm
My sister.
a stop there, but what I will say is that we cannot expect students to be college ready because our systems aren't actually created for that, right? There are archaic models of what is education. They're actually a way to teach people how to be in the workforce. And is that true for everybody? Probably. Like at some point we will have to engage in capitalism. However, we could do that with a more holistic cura personalis approach. So my question for many people as we're doing this is, what kind of practitioner do we want to be? How do we want to create change, and or how do we actually develop frameworks of support moving forward? And I think that that is true, because without relationship, we got nothing. So I appreciate you all. Thank you, InfoBase. Thank you to our rad panel. I'm gonna drop the mic and say good luck, y'all. You will get a recording of this as well as a blog that will be showing up next week. So thank you. Appreciate y'all. Get wild, care about each other, and please take care of each other, because that's all we have. Thanks, everybody. It's been real. Now I'm going to awkwardly do the Minnesota goodbye. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.